Hello, everyone. Welcome to DEI, a podcast dedicated to discussing and raising awareness on the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. My name is Kara Siet, and we're thrilled today to have Alex Rosalez with us. Alex Rosalez is the Director of Product Inclusion at Snapchat, working to build an inclusive environment for Snapchatters for all marginalized communities. Mr. Rosalez has also worked at Amazon for more than 22 years, leading initiatives such as Alexa personalization, e-commerce platform services, and community shopping divisions. Meanwhile, co-founding the first DEI effort at Amazon Search Organization. Mr. Rosales, your efforts in leading DEI is truly inspiring. Thank you so much for being here and so excited to have you on DEI's interview.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here too. Thank you for having me.
Can you start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, no, I think you did a good job, summarizing, my career, but, I kind of add a little bit more to that, which is to say that, maybe starting from my identity standpoint, um, I'm a member of the LGBTQI plus community. I am Latin. But parents on both sides of my family are of Mexican descent. I'm third generation Mexican American. And mi español no es no muy poquito español, but I'm working on it all the time. I actually have a partner who's was born in Mexico, and they're an immigrant. They immigrated here, and so I think like a lot of my kind of lived experience is not just my childhood growing up as as somebody third generation Mexican American, and somebody who's queer, but I think also in my relationship with somebody who kind of lives that the whole experience of being a first generation immigrant. And then I think on top of that, I wanted to add that I didn't go to college, right? So I think that's one thing wasn't in that list of accomplishments. I did not get a college degree, and I was fortunate to have been born in an amazing time where I grew up in the 80s and I got to tinker with computers when you had to know how to program in order to use them. So like my motivation to to learn how to code when I was a child was to play a video game. So I couldn't play a video game unless I knew how to code, and so that motivated me, right? And then when I was a teenager, I learned in the 90s, I learned how to use the internet because I also was able to use it to get access to download video games and software and stuff like that. And so, I kind of evolved. I grew up with the evolution of the technology that is integrated in our lives every day today. And so, my first job out of high school doing customer service. And actually, I technically don't even have a high school diploma, so that's the fun part too. I was homeschooled, and so I don't even have an accredited, diploma. But I my first job, I just found opportunities to. And I can go into too much detail about that, but just high level, found opportunities to automate the work that I was doing by hand and wrote code using the internet to automate that work. And nobody said like, "Hey, do this work and you will become a developer." I just saw the work and to be done and the ability to automate it, new software, and I just did it without asking for permission. And that created a role for me in technology in like 1995, right? And from there, my career went into everything that you talked about, right? And so I just want to share that because I think it's so important, and I think it's like even today, even though it's even more important now to have a college degree. Let me just put that out there. It's super important. I don't want to say that you could do it without one, but I think the moral of that story for me is less about the college degree or the lack of a college degree, and more about how we can create our opportunities. Right? We don't need to be uh, told that we belong. We don't need to be told that there's an opportunity for us. We can create them for ourselves without asking for permission. Now, it doesn't always stick, right? But you have to keep trying and persisting, and eventually, I think that's a path to success that sometimes is overlooked.
Right, that's so cool. I feel like a lot of our generation, we're really focused on getting into a good college, but not really seeing like what we really want or what we really like. And also after like your identity point, I was gonna say, how does your like identity shape how you define DEI, and how did that lead you into pursuing more work on DEI?
That's a really good question. I think there's a couple of points here that come to mind. I might add some additional, but the two that instantly popped to mind when you asked me that question is one, that if you can't see it, you cannot be it, right? And so, in the tech world, there's a lot of, people in leadership uh, uh, that are mostly white men, and there's some Asian as well, Indian men as well, more frequently. Um, but you rarely ever see Hispanic men in leadership in tech. You don't usually see queer men. Steve Cook and Sam Altman aside, by the way, those two are amazing folks that are great role models for people like me in that sense. But you don't see them very frequently, and so that's one thing that kind of motivated me was that, like, going back to my story early in my career when I said, I just wrote code to automate things. I was a customer service rep, and like it wasn't like that was my job, but I did it. Um, there was a woman who helped me, and by the way, anybody ever tells you like they're self-made, they're self-taught, they brought themselves up by the bootstrap, it's never true. There's always somebody helping them, right? And that's a bit of privilege that we all have in some way or another. And some people have more privilege in that sense, right? Well, in this sense, I got really lucky because the woman that helped me out, she was a lesbian woman, and so to be queer in 1995, it was a whole different environment, right? And it wasn't as welcoming to people like me. And to have that in my work environment, I could suddenly just be myself, and like that is something I think that people who are not minorities take for granted, that they can just show up and be themselves, and that it's like breathing air for them. But for the rest of us, it's a source of insecurity. It's a source of like, oh, I might come off as strange or weird or different, and I might not belong, I might not be accepted, right? And so I think that's like one big motivator for me, right? Which is that if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so if I could show people, that in spite of all these obstacles of not having a college degree, of being queer in the 90s, of like being raised by parents who their parents were struggled with surviving as immigrants in this country, that kind of thing. It I think is a good motivator. I think the second one is that when you're building products, which is basically what I do, whether it's in my career, I started out as a software developer, and then now I'm focused on the product management side. In both senses, you're building a product, right? And so when you're building a product, it's more effective to do so if you can empathize with the people using your product, right? And so what oftentimes happens is companies build for their average customer, and they believe that average customer is somebody they can relate to, and oftentimes that average might come out to be cisgendered, white, heterosexual man, right? And so in order to build inclusive products, we need to be able to empathize with a wide range of people, right? And so I think that was also motivating for me, is that being intersectional in terms of identity, I think, wow, I can empathize with so many different identities. Now, it doesn't mean that I can empathize with all identities, but what it does mean is that I can understand that there's a difference between trying to build for the average customer and trying to build for a marginalized customer, because I know what that is to be a marginalized customer. And so knowing that difference, and knowing how important that is, means that, hey, there's an opportunity for me to take my lived experience and use it to impact the world in building the products. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. So as you mentioned, like product inclusion, what, in your own words, what is really product inclusion to you? And also, when I watched the Snapchat DI conference, a highlighted word I saw was outcome. And so what is some tangible ways that Snapchat, where you are trying to build DEI outcome in its products like Snapchats?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'll just say, like, I'm actually speaking for myself here right now. I just about a week or two ago, I ended my role with Snapchat. So, but I'm still passionate about product inclusion, and I'm looking in that direction. But I will say that, like, this is a great question they're asking, and it's something that I think I did in the interview. I talked to Imani about this too, about the difference between product inclusion, product equity, and the outcomes, et cetera. And one of the things that I tried to stress when I was working at Snap on product inclusion specifically was this notion that it's not enough to have an inclusive process for building products. You need to make sure that you have equitable outcomes, right? In fact, just as I was, ending my time there at Snap, I was looking at potentially changing the name of the team from product inclusion to product equity for this reason. And so that might beg the question, what is the difference between inclusion and equity and equality? And I could actually, I think it might be helpful if you think your audience would find it useful to talk about like what equity means and the difference between equality and equity. You think that would be helpful?
Right.
Yeah. So basically, product equity, versus product equality or product inclusion. Product equity is the notion that the product that let's take product inclusion and start there. So product inclusion means that you're building a product that is you're bringing people to the table. It's a process of saying, let's make sure that we're not leaving people out in the development of this product, that we are building this product in an inclusive fashion, right? And so you can do that, and you might end up with a product where everyone has an equal experience, right? So, for example, you might say, I'm going to make sure that this product is accessible to everybody. So, it supports screen readers, and that it has content that everybody might enjoy, regardless of their background or the language they speak or whatever. And so that's equal access, right? However, that doesn't mean that everyone has an equitable experience. So maybe the people with the screen readers are not having the same quality of experience as people without screen readers. Maybe the people who are getting content that is relevant to their backgrounds, like content from the Black community, from the queer community, but maybe the quality of it isn't as great as the quality of the content for everyone else, right? So that's an inequitable experience, right? And so that's what we mean when we talk about product equity, is that we want to strive to build products that are creating equitable outcomes for everyone. And that is really hard. I think it's really easy to try to, I should say it's easy. Man, it's hard enough to build a product that is accessible to everyone, that provides equal benefit or equal access to everybody and equal features to everyone. It's even harder to make sure that everyone gets an equitable outcome. And I think that's where in the product industry, product inclusion industry, if you want to call it that, in that space, in that area, we're all kind of trying to move towards that target of product equity. But like it's a juggernaut. It is so complex, because the first thing you need to do is first get your organization to say, like, hey, we actually care about this. The next thing is to start getting the organization to start investing in it and doing it the right way. And then once you finally get your organization building products in an inclusive way, then you have to start figuring out, okay, how do we build them in an equitable way? So it's a big undertaking. But anyways, I think that hopefully clarifies what we mean by equitable outcomes.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like that kind of just shifts the focus to, because my next question was about AIs, and that really I think ties in a lot with like AIs, because I was going to ask, how do you think the emergence of like generative AI has influenced like diversity, equity, and inclusion? And how do you think through products that incorporates AI, how we can build like equity outcomes even with like new databases with AIs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think first off, it's too early to really say what the impact is going to be. I can somewhat speculate, and I also appreciate you clarifying, generative AI as opposed to just AI in general, because I think there's this misnomer that AI is like this new buzzword or whatever. I mean, like we've been living with AI for a long time, right? It's just that now with generative AI, I think AI is becoming much more tangible, right? So I think the AI I worked on in like the early 2010s was uh, recommender systems, right? So like recommendations on Amazon, and while that's somewhat tangible because you shop and you see like, oh, here's a product recommended to me, or you search for something and you see the right results, or you go to Google, that's somewhat, but it becomes more tangible when you can interact with it and you can communicate with it, and as if you would another person. And I think that it becomes more tangible when it starts to create outcomes or outputs that are similar to what a human being would create, right? And so now I think that this is happening. People are starting to take it a lot more seriously. It's not like it's anything new. Like we've known for decades, probably since the 60s or 70s, that like AI was a thing, and that AI could become impactful in the world. So I just want to call that out, and I appreciate like separating that. And I think one of the things that's I actually just did an interview for this I think it's Sophie, Sophie the robot, AI
Oh yeah.
robot, that company. I was supposed to actually interview with her directly, but she wasn't able to make it to the conference I was at. So I met with one of her representatives, but we were talking about this specific topic. And it's funny because like backstage, there was a lot of doom and gloom, right, around like generative AI and impact to, marginalized communities. And I think some of it's fair in the sense that like, hey, it's AI is, especially generative AI is likely to, and especially if we get to like AGI, generalized AI, and especially even more so if we get to super intelligence, right? That it's going to automate a lot of the work that not just marginalized communities are doing, but like everyone is doing, right? And so that's a perfectly valid fear. At the same time, I tend to be a hopeless optimist, and I think that's probably why, in spite of all the headwinds I've had in my life, I've gotten to where I am. Is that I'm very optimistic and I try to see the upside and take advantage of it. And so I have a more optimistic view of it, and I'm sure reality is going to be somewhere in between. But I think if you don't focus on the more optimistic piece, you're not going to even get to the in between. You're just going to end up with the pessimistic
Yeah.
thing. And to me, the optimistic thing is that it can bring equity, right? It can bring equity in the sense that, for example, actually, a friend of mine who he's he's an entrepreneur, and he's been in tech for decades, and now he does entertainment and all that. And anyways, he reached out to me and said, I need to work on my business plan for one of my new ventures, and I want to use ChatGPT to do it. And I was like, great, let me show you how to do this. And, he, if he didn't have access to this, he probably would have had to pay some consultant, he would have had to try to find somebody to help him build it, And so like, I think, and another example is like, working with this nonprofit, and, they needed to create a logo. And it's like, use ChatGPT, create a logo. Now they don't have to spend money on a, designer, etc. I actually met this woman once at this art show, believe it or not. At this art show, she was a curator. That was her job. She was a curator for art in LA, high end art. And she was just all about generative AI. And I was like, wait, you are, I keep hearing from people in the art world that, oh, we don't like generative AI because it's, stealing our ideas, it's copying our content, it's going to put us out of a job for garbage, right? So but she's actually been working with, she has this venture where she's working with single moms and showing them how they can use generative AI to create passive income on the side, build businesses. So, because of generative AI, these single moms who don't have the money to hire a designer, a copywriter, all these things, like they can just use generative AI to have an army of resources available to build and create something of value for the world and make a living for themselves. So now, suddenly the barrier to becoming an entrepreneur, to starting a business, it used to be that you had to be able to get venture capital, and venture capitalists have to trust you, and to do that you oftentimes have to like have your own money to put into your business. You have to have family money to put in the business. Like, how many people from marginalized backgrounds are going to be able to do that, right? But if you can start a business without depending on venture capital, now it opens up entrepreneurship to like everybody, right? And so, yeah, there's this doom and gloom of all these existing jobs are going away, but then there's this excitement in my mind and optimism around like what amazing new jobs could come about that are more accessible and equitable to the world.
Yeah, right. I think there's because I've read a lot or like heard a lot about like the bad sides of AIs, but it's still like our population still relies a lot on AI no matter what. Like, so it's both like I guess we have to see for the future. Um, moving on. I know you like am not working in Snapchat anymore, but this is more like from a perspective of like a Gen Z population, like how we use Snapchat a lot and um I guess everybody around me uses Snapchat. It's really influential for people my population. Like I would receive like 10,000 snaps a day, like great streaks, whatever. So it has profound influence on my generation, on like the younger Gen Zs. So how has Snapchat, or when you were working there, how have you through its products like helped educate the younger generation about the importance of like DEI?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's so many ways. I think there's the more obvious, ways where there's uh, events that occur like Black History Month, or things like that, where Snapchat will create these stories and celebrate these things, right? And I think there's some more subtle ways actually that I want to talk about. When I was there, one thing I did that your audience might find interesting is that I worked with this with Snap Philanthropy. So Snap has a big branch called Snap Philanthropy that's focused on philanthropic efforts, and they're specifically focused on supporting students from marginalized communities in the LA area. That's one of their big areas of focus. And so through that, I partnered with them and a school called Portal Schools in LA, or they're now called Portal. I think they rebranded themselves. And what we did was we created a design challenge for their students. So it's a school that's focused on helping students from marginalized backgrounds to get non-traditional education that is going to gear them up for the future. And in this case, their education allows them to like have basically like internships almost with companies. And in this case, what we did was we set them up with the design challenge, and we said, hey, we didn't make it super prescriptive. We had it open ended, and we said, hey, here's a problem, which is like, how do you make Snapchat more inclusive? Now go and design a solution. And they went off and they interviewed other high school students. They did research, and they came up with a bunch of proposals. And me and my team reviewed them and gave them feedback and iterated. And they came back with a really awesome pitch for us. And so I think like the reason I want to bring that up is I think there's some more obvious ways that like Snap, kind of educates the public, but I think there's also more on the ground, hands-on way that Snap is trying to do this as well. And then there was also the DEI conference that you had seen, right? Where Snap does an annual summit about DEI, and so yeah, I think it's not just within the product, but I think it's beyond that.
Right. Yeah. I think it's like really important that like because I live in Florida, so obviously we're pretty affected by like DEI and like how like Florida like our governor DeSantis like banned like DEI funding in high schools in colleges. So like barely any high schoolers would talk about this and talk about like our identities, which is why I think it's like important that like it's addressed even in like the daily apps and stuff we use, you know.
Yeah, and I would say, again, I'm not there anymore, so I can't address this feedback, but I think it is good feedback that, maybe Snap could, and I'll relay it to the folks there that I worked with. I think there's an opportunity. I think what you're saying is there's an opportunity, for Snap to facilitate that sort of conversation, right? And I think that was a gap that, wasn't filled while I was there. And I think it is a really important one. And now my understanding is that, Snap is, trying to be somewhat of a neutral kind of place, and not, try to get into anything that people, by the way, I don't think that what we're talking about is political, but sadly, some people see it as political. Like, this
Yeah.
is people's lives, right? But, and so I think that's a challenge that companies like, Snap and X and TikTok,
Right.
they all struggle with this, right? Where it's like, how much do they get involved in societal issues, right? But that said, I think that because Snap is a great platform for people to express themselves authentically and have these sorts of, just non-polished conversations. Like, you don't need to go into, like, with TikTok, you gotta, in YouTube, you have to have, like, some amount of like polish, I think, in order to get attention. And with Snap, it's more raw authenticity. And so I would say, like, I would encourage you and your audience to use it as a platform to have these conversations, right? Don't wait for Snap to educate the public. Like, go and create this content yourself to educate and share your stories, and share with the world what, the challenges you face, and then the opportunities as well for each other, like, show each other. Because I think that, like, there's I say opportunity because um we, you know folks from marginalized communities have something very unique to offer the world, right? We have a unique perspective. And I think that one thing that uh, businesses are starting to realize is that in order to be successful, you can't, you've got to bring in diverse perspectives. You've got to bring in people who have experienced the world differently, who see the world differently, right? So, it is important to acknowledge the challenges that we face, and to commiserate around that. But it's important also not to focus too much on that. And if instead we could focus on our shared strengths and abilities, and how we can leverage those, and really use those to differentiate ourselves. Like, products are not successful in the market unless they differentiate themselves. Same thing in your career. If you can't differentiate yourself, it's going to be difficult, right? So use that differentiation, to your advantage. And I would say, going back to your original thing about, the platform, like, use that platform to talk about those differentiations and how you can use them as an advantage.
Yeah, definitely. That's that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for being here, and it was an incredible discussion. Hope to have you back again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful.